The Westies, a notorious Irish-American gang based in Hell's Kitchen, Manhattan, have a brutal and blood-stained history tied to organized crime in New York City. Known for their ruthlessness, they were involved in a wide range of criminal activities, including extortion, drug dealing, and murder. Their influence spanned decades, marked by a bloody trail of violence and strong connections to the Italian-American mafia, particularly the Gambino crime family. This 2,500-word account explores the rise, reign, and eventual decline of the Westies, focusing on key figures, major crimes, and their impact on both the criminal underworld and the broader society. Origins of the Westies. The origins of the Westies can be traced back to the late 1960s in Hell's Kitchen, a working-class Irish-American neighborhood on the west side of Manhattan. The area had long been a hotbed for Irish immigrant gangs, and by the late 20th century, it had become a rough and tumble place, plagued by poverty, violence, and crime. Out of this environment, a new breed of criminals emerged. The Westies, named for their location on the western side of Manhattan. The Westies started as a small-time street gang involved in petty theft and low-level racketeering, but their activities quickly escalated. By the early 1970s, they had established themselves as the dominant force in Hell's Kitchen, controlling much of the criminal activity in the neighborhood. Under the leadership of James "Jimmy" Coonan, who would become one of the most notorious figures in the gang's history, the Westies began to consolidate their power and expand their operations. Jimmy Coonan and the rise to power born in 1946, James Coonan grew up in Hell's Kitchen and was exposed to crime at an early age. His father was a bookmaker who worked for Mickey Spillane, another powerful Irish-American crime figure in the neighborhood. When Coonan was just a teenager, Spillane had his father kidnapped and tortured, which left a lasting impression on the young Coonan. This act of violence not only fueled Coonan's hatred for Spillane, but also inspired him to rise to power and seek revenge. By the early 1970s, Coonan had assembled a group of loyal and equally ruthless associates, including his right-hand man, Mickey Featherstone. Together, they embarked on a campaign to eliminate their rivals, particularly Spillane. Coonan viewed Spillane as an obstacle to his ambitions, and after a series of violent confrontations, successfully drove Spillane out of Hell's Kitchen. This power struggle solidified Coonan's position as the leader of the Westies. Under Coonan's leadership, the Westies transformed from a neighborhood gang into a sophisticated and violent criminal organization. The gang expanded its operations to include extortion, loan sharking, drug dealing, and contract killings. One of the defining characteristics of the Westies during this time was their extreme brutality. The gang was known for torturing and dismembering its victims, often disposing of bodies in the Hudson River. This level of violence earned them a fearsome reputation, both in the streets of New York and within the larger criminal underworld. The Gambino connection. One of the most significant developments in the Westies' history was their alliance with the Gambino crime family, one of the most powerful mafia families in the United States. In the late 1970s, the Westies began working closely with the Gambinos, particularly under the leadership of Paul Castellano, who saw the Irish gang as a useful asset. This partnership allowed the Westies to expand their criminal enterprises while providing muscle for the Gambinos in exchange for protection and opportunities to profit from the mafia's operations. The Westies' relationship with the Gambinos brought them further into the world of organized crime, particularly in the realms of drug dealing and contract killings. The Irish gang became enforcers for the mafia, carrying out hits and enforcing extortion schemes on behalf of their Italian counterparts. In return, they received a share of the profits from the Gambinos' various criminal enterprises. This alliance also provided the Westies with greater access to the lucrative drug trade, which they had begun to delve into more heavily by the 1980s. Despite this partnership, the Westies maintained their independence, and their brutal methods set them apart even within the violent world of organized crime. They were known for their penchant for torture, often using tools such as ice picks, chainsaws, and blowtorches on their victims. Their reputation for ruthless efficiency made them valuable to the Gambinos, but it also attracted the attention of law enforcement. Notorious crimes and key figures. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, the Westies were involved in numerous high-profile crimes that solidified their reputation as one of New York's most feared gangs. Some of the most notorious figures in the gang's history include James "Jimmy" Coonan. As the leader of the Westies, Coonan orchestrated many of the gang's most violent and lucrative operations. His ruthless ambition and willingness to eliminate rivals by any means necessary made him a feared figure in Hell's Kitchen and beyond. Under his leadership, the Westies expanded their criminal empire and solidified their ties to the mafia. Mickey Featherstone. One of Coonan's closest associates and a key figure in the gang, Featherstone was known for his temper and violent tendencies. He played a crucial role in many of the Westies' murders and was one of the most feared enforcers in the gang. However, Featherstone's unpredictable nature eventually led to his downfall, as he became disillusioned with the gang's activities and turned informant in the late 1980s. Eddie the Butcher. Comiskey. A particularly violent member of the Westies, Comiskey was known for dismembering his victims and disposing of their bodies in the Hudson River. His gruesome methods earned him the nickname the Butcher and cemented his place as one of the most notorious figures in the gang's history. One of the Westies' most infamous crimes was the murder of Michael Holley in 1978. Holley, a Gambino associate, had crossed the Westies by failing to pay his debts. Coonan and Featherstone ordered his killing, and Holley was brutally beaten and shot to death in a Hell's Kitchen bar. This murder marked a turning point for the Westies, as it brought them further into the Gambino orbit and solidified their reputation for ruthless violence. The Westies were also involved in a number of high-profile extortion schemes during this period, including shaking down local businesses in Hell's Kitchen and beyond. They would often demand protection money from business owners, using the threat of violence to ensure compliance. Failure to pay could result in severe consequences, including beatings, arson, or even murder. This extortion racket became one of the gang's primary sources of income, and it allowed them to maintain their stranglehold on the neighborhood. Decline and fall. By the mid-1980s, the Westies had reached the height of their power, but their violent ways had also attracted the attention of law enforcement. The FBI had been monitoring the gang for years, and with the help of informants, they began to build a case against the Westies. The turning point came when Mickey Featherstone, facing charges for a murder he claimed he did not commit, decided to cooperate with the authorities. His testimony would prove to be the gang's undoing. Featherstone's decision to turn informant was motivated in part by his growing dissatisfaction with the direction the gang was heading. He had become disillusioned with Coonan's leadership and was concerned that the gang's escalating violence would eventually lead to his own downfall. In exchange for a reduced sentence, Featherstone provided the FBI with detailed information about the Westies' criminal activities, including murders, extortion schemes, and their relationship with the Gambino family. Featherstone's cooperation led to a series of indictments against the Westies, including Jimmy Coonan and several other key members of the gang. In 1986, Coonan was convicted on racketeering and murder charges and sentenced to 75 years in federal prison. This marked the end of his reign as the leader of the Westies and the beginning of the gang's decline. Without Coonan at the helm, the Westies began to unravel. Many of its members were arrested or killed, and the gang's influence in Hell's Kitchen waned. The FBI continued to crack down on the gang throughout the late 1980s and 1990s, and by the early 2000s, the Westies had all but disappeared from the streets of New York. Legacy and cultural impact. The story of the Westies remains one of the most brutal chapters in the history of organized crime in New York City. Their reign of terror in Hell's Kitchen left a lasting legacy, not only in the criminal underworld, but also in popular culture. The Westies have been the subject of numerous books, films, and television shows, including the 1990 book The Westies by T.J. English, which provides a detailed account of the gang's rise and fall. The Westies' story also reflects the changing landscape of organized crime in the United States. While the mafia has long dominated the headlines, the Westies' alliance with the Gambinos illustrates the complex relationships between different ethnic criminal organizations. Their brutal methods and willingness to engage in extreme violence set them apart, even in a world where murder and mayhem were commonplace. Though the Westies have largely faded from the scene, their story serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked power and violence. Their rise and fall are emblematic of the broader trends in organized crime during